So the question today is it time to be nice to normies and NPCs? So a few weeks ago now, Lee from the Veritas Vincent channel, he referred to an episode of this British sitcom from the 1980s called The Young Ones. And one of the episodes was called Nice. And the kind of gist of it was being nice is boring, and being nice can be sort of dishonest. And it's an interesting question to pose today, is that should we seek to avoid conflict with NPCs to the extent where maybe we let things go that maybe we shouldn't let go, including them, I don't know, maybe trying to take the mickey out of us, or just say get us to try to agree to things that we know are untrue. So this is what I've noticed with some people in particular, is they have I suppose you would say that they have they're high in a trait called agreeableness. They're high in this trait called agreeableness. Sorry, I'm just about managed to get that out. So they try to avoid conflict. But the problem with that is that they can end up compromising themselves. And as a result of that, if you're too nice, you can lack authenticity. And yeah, let's call it as it is. You can lack authority and integrity. Because you're just too worried about what other people think of you and wanting to get along with other people at all costs, even if it means accepting things that are immoral and untrue. Another thing to say as well is that in the comments underneath my videos, I've had a number of people saying, oh, you shouldn't be nasty to normies and NPCs, you're dehumanizing them. I'm really sorry. I think it's most important for me to actually tell the truth. So I'll have no truck with that. It's not me that caused the division. It's them that caused the division. I will just tell the truth, even if it means that they don't think that I'm a nice person. That's a price that I'm prepared to pay. I'm not really that bothered about what normies and NPCs think about me. I think another thing that's interesting is, what's to be gained to talking to normies and NPCs, because what I find is you've got a choice. If you decide to talk to them, you can only talk about boring, insignificant, like, I don't know, small talk. Because if you try to push the conversation towards more interesting subject matter, then they'll just tend to get angry, and as a consequence of that, you become person non grata, in the eyes of the normie, the NPC. The NPC only really wants to hang out with other NPCs and just live in their kind of world of denial and just talk about kind of boring stuff, basically. So for me personally, I'm quite happy to talk to people face to face. But I'm kind of coming to the conclusion it's just a bit of a waste of time engaging with conversation with the normies and NPCs, in the sense of enjoying yourself. There are other reasons why I still think it's important to talk to them that I've not really mentioned before, and I'll come to those later on in the video. But I've just set up a Facebook group, and I've called it The Organic People of Pori. Pori is the town in Finland where I live. So, and the goal of it is to try and sort of facilitate a meetup every month, so that people can talk in person with each other. A little bit like how it was in England with the stand in the park stuff. But I think back in the day when it was popular, what happened, I think, was that police and other kind of bad actors would infiltrate those groups and then, identify individuals and report back. I don't think that they're they're that bothered about that anymore. I don't think those groups will be, particularly organic people of porridge. It's not really going to feature on their radar. And then the second thing is that I think I'm pretty good now at spotting who's who. And it's all very interesting, this. And I guess it stems from a comment that somebody left underneath my channel about, if you're enlightened, you understand what's going on, then you have to accept living as a hermit for the rest of your life. And I think that that's kind of a little bit sad, and I'm going to try and avoid that, at least try anyway. So I'm keen to kind of expand my kind of social circle locally, but with that caveat that the people that I'm interacting with have got to have something kind of interesting to say, which means like no normies and no NPCs. Another couple of comments that people left that I thought were very, very interesting underneath my video by you guys. One person said, I think it was Gwen, said NPCs are primarily cowards because they don't want to admit the presence of evil. And I thought that's true. They want to live in this kind of world of denial, this kind of fake world that doesn't exist. And then somebody else wrote, NPCs are they're more afraid of being ostracized than they are of dying. Final things to say is, what stance should a Christian take on all of this? Should Christians always try to be nice to people, even if that means maybe not rocking the boat, which means going along with lies? Or should Christians instead always prioritize the truth over being nice and getting along with people? So I've got a couple of examples of this. The first one is from the Gospel of Matthew, so chapter 23, and it says, "Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees are the authorized interpreters of Moses' law. So you must obey and follow everything they tell you to do. Do not, however, imitate their actions, because they don't practice what they preach." So basically what Jesus is saying there is that organized religion, even back in 2,000 years ago, it had been corrupted, and Jesus was calling out that corruption. Now, I'm sure some people would say, well, that's not very nice. You're criticizing somebody's religion. But that didn't matter to Jesus. What mattered to him was telling the truth. So he carries on. Jesus says, "They tie onto people's backs loads that are heavy and hard to carry, yet they aren't willing even to lift a finger to help them carry those loads. They do everything so that people will see them. Look at the straps with scripture verses on them which they wear on their foreheads and arms, and notice how large they are. Notice also how long are the tassels on their cloaks. They love the best places at feasts and reserve seats in the synagogues." So, again, some people would say, well, that's not very, Jesus isn't being very nice here, is he? To, these corrupt religious leaders of his day. But I think that's the thing, is that Christians are not they're obliged to tell truth, especially truth to power. Jesus continues, "They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace, to be called teacher. You must not be called teacher, because you are all members of one family and have only one teacher," which is basically God. "And you must not call anyone here on earth Father, because you have only the one Father in heaven. Nor should you be called leader, because your one and only leader is the Messiah. The greatest one among you must be your servant. Whoever makes himself great will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be made great." So if you think that that's, some stinging criticism, like it follows it up. So Jesus continues, "How terrible for you, teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites! You lock the door to the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, and you yourselves don't go in. nor do you allow in those who are trying to enter. How terrible of you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You sail the seas and cross whole countries to win one convert, and when you succeed, you make him twice as deserving of going to hell as you yourselves are. So again, I'm sure there'd be people like saying, "Oh, you're just dividing the people up here. This is divide and rule. You're dehumanizing people." And no, what matters is that you tell the truth. Jesus continues. How terrible for you, blind guides, you teach. If someone swears by the temple, he isn't bound by his vow. But if he swears by the gold in the temple, he is bound. Blind fools. Which is more important, the gold or the temple which makes the gold holy? You also teach if someone swears by the altar, he isn't bound by his vow. But if he swears by the gift on the altar, he is bound. How blind you are. Which is the more important, the gift or the altar which makes the gift holy? So then, when a person swears by the altar, he is swearing by it and by all the gifts on it. And when he swears by the temple, he is swearing by it and by God who lives there. And when someone swears by heaven, he is swearing by God's throne and by him who sits on it. How terrible for you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give to God a tenth even of the seasoning herbs such as mint, dill and cumin, but you neglect to obey the real important teachings of the law, such as justice and mercy and honesty. Honesty, yeah? Even if it means somebody might think you're not very nice, you're obliged to be honest. These you should practice without neglecting the others, blind guides. You strain a fly out of your drink, but swallow a camel. How terrible for you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of your cup and plate, while the inside is full of what you have obtained by violence and selfishness. Blind Pharisee, clean what is inside the cup first, and then the outside will be clean too. How terrible for you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look fine on the outside, but are full of bones and decaying corpses on the inside. In the same way, on the outside you appear good to everybody, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and sins. Now, for the people that have been saying, "Oh, you're being a bit harsh on the people that complied with biomedical fascism and went along with great evil," I invite you in the comments to tell me what Jesus would say about those people. Bearing in mind what he said about people that corrupted religion and did terrible things in his day. We're obliged to tell the truth. And if people say, "Oh, you're splitting people up, you're not being nice," well then, tough. What matters is honesty. We must tell the truth, even if that makes us unpopular, even if NPCs and normies want nothing more to do with us as a consequence of them deciding we're not nice because we've criticised wrongdoing. And I think we need to kind of think about that. One last quote from the Bible. It's about the book of Ezekiel, which is in the Old Testament. And Ezekiel was a prophet. And at that time, people had turned against goodness and started to embrace evil. So all sorts of bad things were going on at the time of Ezekiel being around. And God spoke to Ezekiel and he basically said, "Look, you need to tell people what's going on. And I don't care, you might become unpopular as a result of telling people what's going on and what the consequences are going to be for them of doing whatever they're doing. I don't care whether you think they won't listen to you either. What matters is that you need to speak up. Even if it makes you deeply unpopular, even if people think you're not very nice, you still must speak up." And what I'm going to do now is I'll just read you a passage from chapter 33 of the book of Ezekiel, just to kind of, I'll use the King James version for this. So a watchman's warning. So Ezekiel's the watchman in the sense that he understands what's going on in the world, and his role as a watchman is to warn others, because basically God's justice is going to be meted out on this society that's turned away from him. Because that's the other thing as well that many people don't understand, is that God above all else is just. So yeah, if you go against his law for too long, then bad things happen to the people that have been breaking those laws. So and then the laws, basically we're talking about the Ten Commandments. So I defy anybody to tell me that there's anything wrong in the Ten Commandments. So again, it says, again, the word of the Lord came unto me, this is Ezekiel, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of thy people, and say unto them, when I bring the sword upon a land, if the people of the land take a man of their coasts and set him up for their watchman, if when he seeth the sword come upon the land, he blow the trumpet and warn the people, then whosoever heareth the sound of the trumpet and taketh not the warning, if the sword come and take him away, his blood shall be upon his own head. So basically, what two important things there is that God's patience isn't infinite. So people keep on embracing evil, then God will stop that evil. And then the second thing is that they will be warned. People will be warned, and this is what happened in 2020. People were warned by people like us. You could call us not truthers, but watchmen, in the sense that we were warning others and urging them not to go along with evil. And if you hear that warning and you ignore it, well, then you only have yourself to blame, when the blood shall be on his own head, as it's said here. It carries on. So he heard the sound of the trumpet and took no warning. His blood shall be upon him. But he that taketh warning shall deliver his soul. So if you listen to the warning and you don't comply with, like say, for example, biomedical fascism, and you change your life and you stand up for the truth, well, then you save your soul. But if the watchmen see the sword come and blow not the trumpet, and the people be not warned, if the sword come and take any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at the watchman's hand. So basically, if you know what's going on and you don't warn people, then God will hold you to account. So this is very, very, very important, is that this is probably a very powerful argument in favour of continuing to warn normies and NPCs, because God demands it. You must warn them, and if you don't, well, then you will be held responsible for your reluctance to warn NPCs and normies. So it carries on. So thou, O son of man, I have set thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore thou shalt hear the word at my mouth, and warn them from me. When I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, thou shalt surely die, if thou dost not speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand. Nevertheless, if thou warn the wicked of his way to turn from it, if he do not turn from his way, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul. So if you warn them and they don't turn away, well, at least you're all right, because you actually did what you were supposed to do, in that you used your knowledge, your insights to warn. Therefore, O son of man, speak unto the house of Israel. Again, there'll be people that think this has got something to do with Zionism and stuff, no, it doesn't have. It's just basically, this is where the geographical location on the planet where this was happening, where Ezekiel lived in Israel, and it was Israel that had turned against God. So it's got nothing to do with Benjamin Netanyahu and Gaza and Palestine, and there was no Muslims back in, Islam only began as a religion in 700 AD, and we're talking here about thousands of years before Christ. So, like, well over 3,000 years before. So conclusions then. What I've been saying is that it is very, very frustrating to talk to NPCs, and I understand people that just say, "I'll just leave them to it." Um, on the other hand, I think we are obliged to warn them about what's coming, and that there will be consequences attached to their actions. And I think God holds us to account if we decide. There's no sitting on the fence here. We actually have to. Staying silent isn't an option. That's what I believe. So yes, I understand it's frustrating trying to talk to NPCs and normies, and I don't particularly enjoy hanging out with them at all. But and I don't really want to hang out with them for purposes of pleasure. But I think any opportunity that we get to talk to them and warn them about what's happening, we've got to take those opportunities. So that's all I want to say today. So God bless.